Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. So, in session 2, we looked at the various arguments for the belief in the Creator. And we didn't want to go through all the arguments for the belief in the Creator, we just wanted to use certain key arguments. Most of the arguments, they all rested upon this idea of why do we ask the question, what causes something? And we ask this question when we identify something that is contingent. And we said everything within the universe, including the universe itself, is contingent, meaning it has a beginning to its existence, it has certain attributes which are only possible, it could have had other attributes, it could be arranged in another way as opposed to the way that we see it. When we look and identify this about the universe, and we know that the universe didn't decide its own existence, and we know that the universe didn't decide its own attributes, and the universe didn't decide its own, composition and arrangement. It's like saying the table decided its own existence, or the table decided its own attributes, or the table decided to put the legs of the table and the top in the particular fashion that it was. Because we identify this thing about the universe, then we require something external to the universe, just like we require something external to the table. It's a very profound but simple point, I think. It's not too complicated to really understand this point. Now, in session 3, we're going to look at some of the contentions to some of these arguments. What are the arguments that people use against this? And one of the arguments and one of the contentions is this argument that the universe, or that their explanation, the reason why we've got so many possible beings, contingent beings, is we've got an infinite number of universe. So in universe 1, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. In universe 2, it boils at 101 degrees. And in universe 3, it boils at 102 degrees. And because there's an infinite number of universes, it accounts for why the objects within the universe have those particular attributes and those particular arrangements. So this is one of the arguments that they attempt to use to try and circumvent the possible beings that exist within each universe. Even some scientists propose the idea of a multiverse. Some scientists argue that the laws of quantum mechanics, or the implications of superstring theory, indicates that there are more than one universe out there. However, there's two problems in regards to this question about could there be a multiple number of universe, and could this provide an explanation of why limited dependent things exist, why they have the particular attributes. Well, the first problem is this: it still doesn't provide an explanation why limited contingent beings exist in the first place. Why does each universe have a specific set of attributes and a specific set of patterns different to another universe? So why is universe A like this and universe B like that? It doesn't provide an explanation. It's just simply saying this universe exists and this universe exists, and this one has a possible existence and that one has a possible existence. We've still not explained why they exist in the first place. Therefore, it's not an explanation to the existence of limited contingent beings. Secondly, even if we grant the idea that there is an infinite number of universes or multiverses, we still have a problem. And that problem is the problem is this idea that you can have an infinite number of finite things. So if you've got an infinite number of universes, what you're saying is you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to infinity number of universes. So you have an infinite number of limited things. So one universe is limited, self-contained, different to another universe. And some people say, well, that's a possibility because, doesn't numbers go on forever? Don't numbers just keep going on? You can keep adding 1 to a particular set of numbers and go on forever. So couldn't the universe be like that? And we say that the statement, an infinite sum of finite things, we say this is an impossibility, and it's a contradiction. It's an irrational argument. It's a rational idea. And there's a number of ways of arguing this and demonstrating how it's irrational. The first way is to look at the issue, to give an analogy about marbles. Actually, before I give the analogy of marbles, I want to just explain this point about numbers. And do numbers in actuality go on forever, even though there's no terminating number? Or maybe another way to look at it, can I count when I start from 1 and I continue counting 2, 3, 4, 5? Can I continue counting and reach the infinite number? Now, most people would say, well, that's impossible. You can't do that. Because every number you land upon will be what? A finite number. So even if you go a trillion, you'd have a trillion and one. It's a finite number. A squillion and one. Still a finite number. So you can never actually reach infinite number. What you reach is another finite number. So when we say the numbers go on forever, even if we count and we take out the concept of, we say we've got an eternal life, we're still counting. We will always land upon a finite set of numbers. Yeah, it's a finite number. And even if somebody says, yeah, you can reach infinite, well, okay, what was the number just before you got to infinity? Obviously, there is no number just before infinity. The other example that I wanted to give was the example of an infinite pile of marbles. Just to explain and just also demonstrate the irrationality of this statement of an infinite sum of finite things. So imagine you had an infinite number of marbles, and this big pile of marbles with an infinite number of marbles, you cut them in half exactly. How many number of marbles do you have in each of the halves? Now somebody might say, well, they become finite. Well, if they became a finite number, a limited number, then limited pile of marbles add a limited pile of marbles would equal a limited number of marbles. So when you cut the marbles in half, you have to have infinite number of marbles in one half and another infinite in the other pile of marbles. And in fact, if you create 4 piles, I cut them into quarters, 4 piles of marbles, then every pile of marbles would have to be infinite, because when you add infinite plus infinite plus infinite plus infinite equals infinite. If they became limited, then limited plus limited plus limited plus limited would equal a limited number. So every fraction of an infinite sum of finite things would have to be infinite. Every fraction would have to contain an infinite amount of things. Now, there's a contradiction that we're starting to see. One of these contradictions is why, when we say that the infinite is being subdivided here, if I was to take 3 marbles away from the infinite pile of marbles, the original pile that I had, have I decreased infinity? The answer would be no. You haven't decreased the number of marbles, because the marbles are still infinite. But if you not decrease the number of marbles, then where those 3 marbles come from? Not only this, but those 3 marbles are a fraction of the overall number of marbles. And we said every fraction of an infinite sum of finite things has to be infinite. But here we have a proportion, a fraction, which is finite, i3, 3 marbles of the overall pile. So the proportion of the pile of marbles is equivalent to the proportion of the 3. So if the 3 is a finite number, then the overall would also be finite, would also be limited. If we are saying that it's infinite, then we have this contradiction, this paradox, where we're saying every fraction is infinite, but then we create a fraction of taking 3 marbles away from the overall, and it's not infinite anymore. So when we look at this argument about infinite sum of finite things, we say it's an impossibility. And this is not just something which I said or a few people said. Even famous mathematicians like David Hilbert has mentioned the point that this idea of infinity is not the basis of rational thinking. You can't use it as a basis of rational thinking. He even argued that there is nothing within the universe, whether that is a circle, the most spherical thing that we know is an electron, whether it is even the universe and its expansion, there's nothing within the universe that is actually infinite. So even this idea that the universe is constantly getting bigger and bigger and bigger, he says that every moment of its size, it will always be finite. Yeah, so it's just constantly bigger, getting bigger. So he'd use this term, it's finite but unbound. So he's saying it's still finite at any moment, even though it will continue to expand. So he explains that this idea of infinity is impossible to be applied in the real world. It just doesn't make sense. It falls into contradictions and it falls into inconsistencies. So when somebody argues that you can have an infinite number of universes, then that is a fallacy. That is a contradiction. And we can use this argument that the sum of finite is always finite to explain that the universe is finite. So if I can measure the distance between 2 points, between this point, point A and point B, and we say it's 1 meter, then I know that the rest of the universe is a fraction, a proportion over these 2 points. And if the fraction and proportion is finite, then the universe must also be finite, even without measuring the entirety of the universe. Similarly, if I ask the question, does time have a beginning? And I say time is the number of events that have taken place. Could time have a beginning or could it be eternal? Well, eternality would mean an infinite number of events. But we just said an infinity cannot exist when it comes to adding up finite things to make infinity. So therefore there must be a limited number of events and thus a beginning to time. So what we've shown is that the sum of finite is always finite. Therefore there has to be, even if we're talking about other universes, there has to be a finite number of other universes. They're still limited, contingent, dependent beings. We have to have a space which is finite and a universe therefore which is limited and finite. And we also have to have time which has to have a beginning, because the number of events in time also have a beginning. The number of events have to have is a finite number. So this contention that is used by some atheists fails to be a rational basis to really undermine the proof for the existence of the Creator.